This project is, as far as bank stabilization in small streams goes, is it's on the complicated end. There's a lot going on here.
Located in Jefferson County, where the Calico Creek meets the Big River, there's a lot going on, like Joe said. As a hydraulic engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers, Joe Collum and the many other teams we'll talk about later have spent a lot of time at this confluence. And although there's a lot of moving parts with multiple sites and organizations and teams, everyone and everything is working toward the same goal: to restore and stabilize eroding areas along the Big River that have been affected by hazardous lead contamination.
We have a few different approaches that are different, but these features are all ones that we're familiar with. You know, there's guidelines and specifications for how you go about designing for these things. It's just to put them all in one site, one project, all at once. It does add some complication to it.
So let's talk through some of these features. The restoration project has 3 sites that each use different approaches. Here is Site 1. The approach used here was to restore what was previously a second channel for the Calico Creek to flow into the Big River. By adding what is basically a second lane of traffic for the water to flow, it prevents high water levels from further eroding the riverbank. Site 2 uses something called wayward weirs, which are these rock structures that stick out into the river.
In simple terms, like if you had an obstruction in the river's going to flow over it like this. And if it's tilted like this, the river, if it's going this way, it's going to turn and flow over it like that. So what these weirs do is they're tilted upstream, and it will turn the river as it goes through this bend so that it's no longer eroding the outside bank. Instead, it's focused more towards the center of the channel. These weirs actually point the final flow as it finishes going through this bend directly into where we want it for the next bend.
The next bend is Site 3, where they are implementing a tow-wood structure. A tow-wood structure utilizes layers of timber and rock and vegetation to restructure and stabilize the riverbank. This area was once heavily covered in brush, and it's common for landowners to cut it down, but that area of vegetation, called the riparian zone, is essential to keeping the ecosystem in balance. That's why at each site, they're also creating areas for new growth to take place.
So what happens is when the river comes up, some of the sediment that the river's carrying will actually flow over into that space between the rock structure and the bank. You know, whether it's good sediment or bad sediment, it will deposit there, and over time you'll actually see vegetation start to grow up there, and you'll get to see some more habitat and just a lot of good river things happening there.
So Joe knows about the hydraulics of the project, but like I mentioned, there are a lot of organizations involved to carry out their area of expertise. That brings us to Steve Harrington with the Nature Conservancy.
This is an area that's had a long history of lead pollution. Projects like this do a really good job of greatly reducing the amount of lead that continues to load into the system.
Now, we've met Steve before a few years ago on a similar project at LeBark Creek. That used a lot of the same techniques we've talked about here, but on a much smaller scale. The work at both LeBark Creek and Calico Creek are considered pilot projects, which allows everyone involved to learn what works well and what doesn't, so they can apply it to future projects.
Merrimack River Basin, including the Big River, has amongst the highest biodiversity in this entire region of the United States, particularly in the Midwest region. So doing projects like this that can help reduce stream temperatures over time by having shade, that can help create in-stream habitat by having habitat for those fish to find places to hide and find food to eat. Incorporating these nature-based solutions by getting green, live plants, that provides corridors for insects, birds, mammals, and just creates more so that there's greater resiliency into the future with the change in climate. And all that has a benefit as we reduce the pollution that goes downstream into our waterways, into the Merrimack, and potentially into the St. Louis area.
It sounds simple, just putting some extra rocks and trees around the water, And using bioengineering techniques is supposed to look simple to the average person because they mimic the way nature intended the process to look. But by just waiting to let nature take its course, we'd be losing a lot of biodiversity waiting for that to happen.
We have threatened and endangered species such as freshwater mussels. We refer to those as indicator species because they do tell us the quality of the watershed and the river, and we're losing those mussels. So that tells us that now is the time. If we do nothing, those species will be eliminated. Other species will be greatly impacted.
Matt Vielhaber is the project manager with the Army Corps of Engineers, and above all else, he emphasizes that the collaboration between the organizations is essential to this project.
One of the coolest parts about this project it is by definition collaboration. We have 3 federal agencies. We have a state agency. We have NGOs or non-governmental organizations such as the Nature Conservancy. I'd be remiss if I didn't also point out that the collaboration is absolutely tied to the landowners. All of these projects are planned for privately owned lands. We understand that these landowners purchased this land for themselves and their families to be able to enjoy this beautiful habitat and recreate, and we're not looking to impact that. It's also important to note that these issues are along the Big River now. If we do nothing, it will migrate to the Merrimack and ultimately to the Mississippi. So, a greater area of impact, more species will be impacted. It's a big deal.
For Living St. Louis, I'm Brooke Butler.